This is an introduction to Week 7, Progressive Education Pedagogical Progressives, and everything for this unit is due Thursday, March 9th at 11:59 p.m. A few notes on terminology in this class, this unit. Pedagogy means teaching or instruction related to education in the classroom. Pedagogy is a fancy word for teaching. Progressive is another word that could use some clarifications, in part because it's pretty overused. Progressive means a lot. Progressive rock, progressive car rental, progressive party, progressive tax. Is Bernie Sanders progressive? What about the Democratic Party? Lots of debate about these things. So in this unit, I'm using progressive as a political philosophy and in reference to the progressive period, or a time period that historians generally identify as between 1880 and 1920, when a lot of progressive things happened. And by that use of the term, we can go back to progressive as a political theory that is on the left or liberal side of the spectrum, and that believes in government intervention for the social good. Progressivism is a broad philosophy based on the idea of progress, as in progressivism, which asserts that advancement in science, technology, economic development, and social organization are vital to the human condition. So I'll say that again. Progressivism is a broad philosophy based on the idea of progress, which asserts that advancement in science, technology, economic development, and social organization are vital to the human condition. Or we might say, progressive political theory is a belief in irrationally expanding government and other services to improve the social community. This involves the expansion of social services and social welfare, such as education, health care, supports for the poor, and the understanding that science, not religion and not tradition, and not necessarily business, can make things better. Progressive education holds all of those things I just said, with particular attention to education. And progressive education is generally divided into two camps. First, pedagogical progressives, who think about teaching and about how classroom practice can improve the social good. And in this work, the scientific thinking falls largely on educational psychology and child development theory. How do kids learn best if our goal is to prepare future citizens to improve the social good? The second strand of progressive education is what we will look at next week, and it's called administrative progressives. And this approach is more interested in the government or organizational expansion of the problem. How do we create systems of schooling, organization, and society that can intervene in society to improve the organizational good, to improve the social good? So how can we create organizations that can improve the social good? In the history of education of progressive pedagogy, or the pedagogical progressives, the educational philosopher John Dewey is the leading star. And if you want to get a handle on John Dewey, see the weird little 10-minute cartoon called video for this week called A Conversation with John Dewey. There are a lot of videos about John Dewey, and he was, as one video says, a rock star of modern education. And he's worth knowing a lot about. He's a really interesting guy. More fun and probably a little more inspiring is the next video for this week. It's a 7-minute video with a neat song on the topic of social reconstruction. Social reconstruction is a type of educational philosophy that aligns with a lot of progressive education. It's quite a bit more activist than pedagogical progressives, and yet it has the same issues and concerns about improving society. Then there is a cute little 7-minute newsreel from the 1940s that explains progressive education and its challenges. I really like the concerned father in the opening scene. He says, "Now hold on, Miss Fox. It's very well for my son to paint pretty pictures and build birdhouses, but he doesn't even know his multiplication tables." So introduce the challenges of progressive education. Then watch my 15-minute video on progressive education. It takes a little while to download this video. I talk too much. It's representing my really interest in this time period. It's a fascinating time period for history of education. This video will review a lot of what you just learned, but I also go a bit into the administrative progressives, which is next week's topic, and I also talk a bit about the historiography of progressive education. There are also some nice pictures there, too. In terms of reading, you're going to read Susan Semmel's introduction to her book called Schools of Tomorrow, Schools of Today, and she offers a nice sort of encapsulation of progressive education. Then read Lawrence Kremen's description of the Lincoln School in New York City, which shows how a progressive school worked. Make sure to go to the way end of that article to see the graphic of the unit of study about boats for third graders. It's a really nice visual on how scientific and planned out some of these progressive educational ideas were. Then read Daniel Pearlstein's terrific and somewhat troubling article about how progressive education could go wrong, very wrong, in one place at one time. After all this, you'll have a pretty good sense of the foundations and principles and some of the challenges of progressive pedagogy as it was introduced in the United States in the early 1900s. There are 2 questions for our discussion this week. One asks you to explain progressive education in your own words, and the second asks you to think about where progressive education went wrong. Now, I want to add some of my own thinking here, too. Many people today might say that in these days of massive testing, we have no progressive education at all. But I would argue that we have remnants of progressive education in every science laboratory, every recess, every school club, every community activity that exists for kids today. We do test kids and we test teachers a lot, but we also have a common understanding, for the most part, that kids need to take part in their education, that they need to get involved, they need to work together, and to some extent learn by doing. That's progressive pedagogy or progressive lessons. It may not be progressive education on a broad scale, but it does, I believe, still exist in today's education. Next week, Unit 8, we go into administrative progressives, and also next week there will be the Unit 2 quiz. And then we have spring break. See ya.